Oh, Um, all right. So, what about hydroponics? What about vertical farming? What about aeroponics and stuff like
Still on
that?
topic of forestry, sorry, but
Well, I mean, it's kind of adjacent. So, this stuff all hooks together. You remember that trillion tree project and that YouTuber guy who, I don't know, raised money to plant 10 million trees or something like that?
yeah.
Um, so, the trillion tree project is predicated on some studies that say, okay, if we take the 50% of forests globally that we've deforested and we actively replant all of that, that'll cover a small chunk of our carbon footprint. And it will also have a bunch of really good environmental effects like reversing desertification in some places and stuff like that, and amending soils naturally as we go. Um, that's all kind of predicated on the idea of okay, well, we need to have space to plant another trillion trees. There's between, I think, 3.5 and 4.5 trillion trees currently. And so to add like a non trivial amount to that, another one third, you need another one third of all the forested space that used to be forested back. And a lot of that now has become farmland. So the idea of, you know, if there's a way to, in a carbon negative way, scale up basically warehouse farms, um, then that takes a little bit of the pressure off some places where we need to do some afforestation, reforestation, and we can sort of get across the finish line with that. Uh, Otherwise, we're trying to plant places that we have no business planting, like up close to the Arctic Circle, as the polar ice caps melt and stuff like that. And the forests are very dark colored, so they trap heat instead of letting it go. Um, So on paper, it's part of the solution, right? Like none of this stuff is a single option for dealing with restabilizing the climate and stuff like that for future generations that we'll never meet. Um, but done right, it could be part of the solution. So in places where the latitude is low enough, meaning the sun angle is high enough that like photovoltaic solar power generation is a much better idea than farming. So like think of basically anywhere in Arizona. It's a terrible idea to be farming in Arizona. You're sucking fossil water out of the ground using fossil fuels and then spraying a bunch of it on fields that are tiny. They're not particularly productive, and you're losing lots and lots and lots of water to evaporation because it's the Sonoran Desert or it's the Mojave Desert nearby. Um, like you can force farming into those places, but why would you? Instead, if you can, half bury a warehouse so it's partially underground, you don't have to do as much air conditioning, um, and have basically infinite power from a bunch of solar panels nearby and so forth, and not have to hammer fragile and nutrient depleted desert soils for aeroponics and stuff like that. Yeah, that can scale anywhere. Like you can stick that in a desert and paint the roof reflective or cover it in solar panels and stuff like that. You still have to solve the water problem, but another problem for another day. So yeah, I'm not opposed to that stuff. And the question is, do we get more out of it than we have to put in? Right now, we spend lots of calories of fossil fuel to generate each calorie of food value to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, part of the petrofuels are the nitrogen and the fertilizer. It's also stuff like, um, petroleum-based fuels to run the foundries to build the farm equipment or the aeroponics warehouse. Right, there's no magic there. Um, and then there's also all of the distribution. So loading 20,000 chickens on a semi or 50 head of cattle or whatever, and driving those all over the country because we got to have our burgers and fresh lettuce. Um, and people really like having fresh vegetables in January and February and stuff like that. So we're driving stuff all over the place, and largely out of California, which is very productive for the moment. Um, So yeah, we're still spending some of those fossil fuel calories at the moment on manufacturing and setting up aeroponics and stuff like that. But it can be extremely efficient because instead of just spraying a bunch of spraying a bunch of water and nutrients onto the soil and having some of it blow away onto some other field or just evaporate and go up or break down under UV light from the sun. Um, Warehouse farming is super carefully controlled. I mean, like you have the temperature optimized down to the tenth of the degree. Um, your growth lights have very specifically designed, wavelength profiles to get exactly the colors that chlorophyll responds best to. And just the whole thing works really well. So a single facility, a vertical farming, basically warehouse facility in Japan, I think it's hydroponically based instead of aeroponics. They, in one building, can supply literally the entire nation of Japan with lettuce, and they're
That's
good to
insane.
go. Yeah, and they were able to do it at profit. Like they spent less money wise. I mean, carbon is still pretty intensive, but places like Japan, they can get free infinite geothermal energy kind of once that's set up. So yeah, that's a thing, and I would expect to see more of it. So here in Southern Illinois, we have genuinely productive soils, and whatever we didn't deplete in the 1920s and 30s with the dust bowls from just idiot style farming, um, and the droughts that we hit back then, whatever's left is still really pretty good. We were talking the other day in the lab session about the monster bucks that feed on the soybeans grown in Peoria, Lus. Uh, it's a great place to do farming, but um, even for stuff like different kinds of mushrooms, like portobellos, which you can cook like a steak and they're pretty good, and all sorts of different like oyster mushrooms and shiitake and stuff like that. There's a mushroom basically warehousing facility, and they don't even really have to pay much in terms of electricity because mushrooms don't need light to grow. So part of the answer is um, deploying stuff in places where ecologically our just mindless assumptions about factory farming shouldn't work, like the deserts of Arizona and stuff like that. Um, but also looking for new markets in places where nobody really thought about it, like Southern Illinois and mushrooms. They're delicious and uh, super efficient operation. He just hauls in logs of different kinds, sporulates from his current crop, because an individual mushroom produces millions of spores, so he's never going to run out of seed crop, and sells them at a premium to like Michelin rated 4 or 5 star restaurants, and dude's making bank. Um, so yeah, it's a matter of switching off of, okay, so corn and soy in rotation using my proprietary combine harvester that I can't fix, and using a bunch of ammonium nitrate spray fertilizer just because that's how we've always done it for the last generation. Um, Anybody kind of getting off of that merry-go-round, there's plenty of opportunity, and LEDs are cheap. They're energy efficient. It works fine for growth lights. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. What else? It's great questions, man.
That's
I was kind of wondering,